Hello there, my name's Vinny Voodoo, and towards the end of February I released a video highlighting some of the nuanced changes that had been made to Verdansk. I'm not talking about massive things like opening the stadium up, I'm talking about just some of the subtleties that had been done to make the game look better. Well, with the reduction to 1984's Verdansk, I guess it's time to revisit that, since a lot of the things we looked at in that video, which I'll link to in the description and at the end of this one, have been sort of either replaced, removed, or rendered moot. So, without further ado, why don't we go and have a tour of duty around what I consider the best looking Verdansk so far, and see what subtle changes they made to make it look so good. The kind of impetus for this video was actually something that happened while I was recording the Texture Pack 4. Where I put that red arrow, you'll notice the light flicker there. What actually happened there, and I'll slow it down here, is an airstrike had come between the sun and the room I was in, proving that that's a real light source. That's not a baked-in texture, you can see it there. And it just so happened the sun blocked that light source for that moment as the airstrike went over. So I went and had a look at the sun, and noticed now the glass is dirty. And it's not just one dirty texture, because I looked at several panes of glass, and they're dirty in different ways. And I thought that was a neat little touch there. And speaking of glass, you notice that this fluorescent light there is reflected in the fire hose glass. That's, I think, a screen space reflection, because as I come around you can sort of see it form the daylight in it, in between the plane. That little triangle of daylight there is from over on the left there. It's a lovely touch, that. And speaking of the fluorescent lights, there's a haze and a heat that comes off them. It's not just a bloom. And I'll zoom in and you'll see, hopefully the YouTube compression in this will show this. If you go and look at one of these, you can see the smoke coming off it, the dust and grime and oh, the reason I'm showing this clip is that's not a screen space reflection. So that must be a ref map that they've built in to the ground, because as I look down, that sign didn't disappear. And I'll go into more what screen space reflections are in a moment, but as I look down, the sign that's above that is still there, and if that was a screen space reflection, that sign had gone off screen, it couldn't be there. So I think what they're doing, and I'm showing it here, is they're combining several mirror effects, ref maps, sky maps, and screen space reflections, and probably other things too, but it does get confused. Flint Mushroom came in here and I immediately noticed there was kind of a weird corruption around him. And if he moves around, and that's what I asked him to do, left and right, you'll see it gets much, much worse. There you go. I just thought that was, you know, a trade-off for having it. This, I thought, was awesome. This is God rays, which normally used to be placed by hand, but I find it difficult to believe they're placing them by hand in a place like the size of Verdansk. And it's grimy and dusty and dirty. And if they placed them by hand, it would limit their ability to change the time of day whenever they wanted, which I'm assuming they're going to do at some point. So that's a calculated God ray from the Omni source, the sun. And again, speaking of grimy, I noticed this sign had been badly wiped down or scratched up. Kudos to the artist who made that. Now what we're looking at here is mirrors. Now standard mirrors in video games usually have no mirroring whatsoever. There's just a ref map to kind of indicate that there's a mirrors there. But some of the mirrors, the new mirrors, are actually representing what's behind you. You still can't see yourself, but you see those stairs are actually there. And if I go look at another one in the same building, there's a kind of a bar area behind me, and it's showing the bar area. So either someone's taking the time to make those ref maps, or it's calculating them on the fly. Brilliant. Right. The only reason I'm showing this clip is I went to look at the sun. I was again looking at full God rays, and we just came first just then, and that light kind of shone through. Just showing off. Now, here on the right is the truck. Screen space reflection, definitely. So the white truck on the left is reflected in the glass on the right. But the trouble is they're doing single pass screen space, so your gun reflects in any screen space if you can see it. And I've shown this in a previous video, but you can see my gun reflecting on the glass on the left, and it shouldn't there. I'm not close enough to that glass for it to do it, and in fact it gets bigger as it goes on, and it's a trade-off. What they'd have to do is do a rendering of the area without the gun, and then with the gun just to remove that effect. And you can see it again there, and I just don't think that they thought it was worth it, given that would double the effective time it would take to render any scene. And you have to go and look for it to see it. Speaking of reflections, this kind of blows me away because it almost looks ray traced. The yellow and red reflections there. I don't think it's screen space, but I'm not sure what it is. And they've taken the time to take that yellow and red and reflect it as a ref map over on the other side. That can't be screen space. I'm not looking at the signs now, but there's a representation of it. Again, the yellow and red there, that adds to the feeling of realism. But I loved that reflection there. And that can't just be a time of day change because we're indoors. Speaking of time of day, I noticed there's always a storm now above the prison. I wonder what they got planned for that. Yes. Right. Speaking of time of day, here, the lighting system does change when you go in and out of buildings. People have noticed that there's a kind of blue hue on the outside of buildings and a yellow one when you go in. And sometimes if you're in the right place, you can sort of see it do it. You can just see there the shadow kind of come in as I walk in, as it changes from one lighting system to another. And I'm sure there's a very good reason they did that. Now, anyone who had a VCR in the 80s will remember that it's a shame the 12 isn't blinking, because everyone had a VCR and everyone had the 12 blinking because they couldn't be bothered to set the time. A neat little touch there. This is good. This is the yellow effect there is being reflected by the doors over on the outside there. And I can show that kind of like effect here. In one window, there's the sun coming through, just like we saw earlier. But in the other, it's actually reflecting the green of the trees. It's not a true reflection, but it's probably some sort of screen space reflection. Speaking of which, you can see that kind of pipe being created as I look up and down. That's because in a screen space reflection, you take sort of like half of the screen and flip it, mirror it downwards. So as you start looking down, there's less and less data to flip. So then you have to replace it with some other form of reflection, which is usually a sky map or something like that. And so if you go up to water in this game and look up and down, you'll see it kind of forming and disappearing, wiping away. The trees in the background that are reflected quite clearly there as I look down suddenly vaporize and then reappear. Screen space reflections there. This windmill caught me off guard. I thought it was a neat little touch. It's just, again, little touches. The sails are billowing slightly in the wind. Very nice, very nice. And I started going off to look for other things, and I noticed that the shadows in this game are now crisp, no matter how close you get to them. And if there is just a single light source for the exterior, that's incredibly difficult to pull off. And yet they are. Now this clip is pre-1984. This is from the most recent iteration of Verdansk before Season 3. And this is the same area after Season 3 came in. And I noticed they'd sort of post-warred it. And don't forget, this game's set in 84. They could have kept that previous set of stanchions there, but they didn't. They wanted it to look older, or newer, effectively. And the way they've prettied it up, I just saw this sign, I thought that's really, really nice. And there's just little things like that. I mean, look at the little petals falling off this tree there. And then there's just things you can buy that, you know, they start to fill the world up and make it look more vibrant. Okay, we'll end on this clip. This is just an example of when it doesn't quite go right. You see those kind of hairs that are on that wall there on the left? I think that's a combination of the screen space reflection, the bump mapping, and the lighting not liking each other. So I went and had a look at other walls, and I noticed this wall here, pure bump map, old school bump map, except for the end. It's tessellated. And so they've combined tessellation and bump mapping, but you can see the seam. You can see that's bump mapping there, and yet there's a kind of like a true 3D effect on the corner. And they did that so that the edge wasn't just a straight edge, which would happen with bump maps. You can see the difference in colour there. And it was just, again, a nice touch. They didn't have to do that. Who would have cared if the corner of that building was a straight edge? Someone cared enough to do that. They just didn't quite get the colour right. Anyway, let's jump out. And so there we go. I really do like the changes that are being made to Verdansk. I must admit I was a little cautious when it said it was going to the 80s because I really don't like the look of Cold War. but they've actually made Verdansk look better than it ever has, in my opinion. But maybe there's areas that you've seen that I didn't cover in this video. Please leave me a comment. And in the meantime, thanks very much for watching. My name's Vinny Voodoo, and I will talk with you soon. Now, I'm just leaving a gap here because I want to put the little tiles in that YouTube make you put in. So I'll just waffle away. Hello, doobie-doobie-doo. Yes, two fish in a tank, one says to the other. How do you drive this thing? I'll just leave that there. Talk soon.